So now we're going to get into the veggies. Who has made fermented veggies? It's all right, this is good. I love it when people haven't done it before. It's all brand new. And people who have, so that's good. And even if you haven't made them, have you tried them before? Yeah, like them? Yeah, they're good, huh? Okay, so reasons why we absolutely love and adore fermented vegetables. They are an amazing source of probiotics, okay? So probiotics, pro means for biotic life. So these are bacteria that help provide us with life. We are outnumbered 10 to 1 by bacteria and yeasts and viruses and parasites and all manner of things. So there's actually 10 times as many bugs in you and on you as there are human cells, okay? So we're actually really just bug puppets. And they affect every aspect of our health, okay? So much so that they are being considered now as another organ of the human body, because if we did not have them, we would be dead, and when we get the wrong ones, things start going wrong in all manner of areas, yeah? So we really want to make sure that we're maintaining good microbial balance, particularly in our gut, because that's where most of them are, in the bowels in particular, the large intestine. So by incorporating fermented foods into our diet, this is a way for us to get a regular intake of beneficial flora. And not only are we getting the probiotics, but because vegetables also contain prebiotics, they're in their food source. So they're active and they're alive and they're ready to get to work straight away, rather than taking a supplement, which probiotic supplements definitely have their place, but they're not the same as having it in the food form. The bugs in a supplement basically have to be woken up before they can get to work, and they're in there by themselves basically, okay? Whereas these microbes, they're in with their prebiotics, but they're also in there with a wealth of enzymes, and these enzymes are produced as a result of that fermentation process, okay? So what is happening is the microbes in the food are eating up all the sugars in the food, and they're producing different acids and enzymes as a result. So the enzymes in there, they help us to digest our food. They can also help out with immune function and detoxification processes. We need enzymes for everything that happens in our body, okay? Everything that happens, if we didn't have enzymes to facilitate it, nothing would happen. We'd just be little nothings really, blobs sitting around. So we need it for energy production, we need it for immune function, we need it for digestion, and so much more. So it's got a lot of enzymes in there. They've also, as you would have noticed, have a bit of a sour or tart flavour. And that flavour is very important, because these days we're so regularly only incorporating sweet and salty foods in our diet, and we don't get a lot of bitter and sour anymore. And these flavours actually have functions, because they activate different receptors on our taste buds, and they send different kinds of messages to our brain to tell our stomach what to do, what to prepare for, okay? So when we have things that are sour or tart, we have messages from our taste buds to our brain, to our stomach, to produce more hydrochloric acid. So our stomach acid is better, so we're going to break down our proteins better, we're going to absorb our B12 better, we're going to absorb our minerals better, because we need a really acidic environment in the stomach for any of that to happen. It's also really important that we have an acidic environment in the stomach, so that when the mix of food, partially digested food and acid, leaves the stomach and goes into the small intestine, the more acidic that is, the more bicarb ions we produce, okay, from the pancreas. And the more bicarb ions we produce to buffer that acid, the more enzymes we produce. So if we don't have enough digestive acids, we end up with not so much bicarb and not so much digestive enzymes. So then on all fronts of digestion, we start suffering, and we can get bloating or gas or IBS, indigestion, all sorts of symptoms of the GI tract. So the number one thing, make sure you've got good stomach acid, and the fermented foods really help with that. Okay. So then we've got the next benefits of fermented veggies, which is they're like taking a multivitamin and mineral supplement, but better because they're the natural forms of the vitamins. And they've got a lot more of them than their unfermented counterparts. So with fermented cabbage, for example, you can get between 50 and 300 times more vitamin C from fermented cabbage than from raw or cooked cabbage. Okay, so that's a huge difference. And that happens with quite a large range of nutrients, and a lot of B vitamins are included in that. So one of our main sources of B12, for example, is our gut flora. In our gut, they produce B vitamins. In fermented foods, also producing B vitamins. So just like, you know, we all eat and poop, the bugs do too, but fortunately for us, a lot of their poop is our nutrients, so their B vitamins, biotin, vitamin K, all these kinds of things. So yeah, you've got your digestive enzyme, your acid stimulating properties, your probiotic, and your vitamin and mineral. So this is why the combination of fermented veggies and bone broth, I often say, if we didn't change anything in the diet but brought those two foods in, we'd have a different healthcare system. Yeah, it's a pretty outrageous statement, but I think there's an element of truth in that, because if we start looking after our guts a lot better, everything else sings along a lot happier. So let's make some fermented veggies. Well, I will, and then later you will. So you're going to make these today, but I shall show you first how it's done. We're, as I said before, very lucky these days because we have some amazing brands, amazing small companies making them for us, which is a pretty new thing again. You know, in years gone by, fermented foods were just a staple part of, or a regular part of the diet. Until the fridge came into the picture and canning and that kind of industrial food, and then we no longer needed to ferment our foods to preserve them anymore, yeah? So unfortunately with that process our food got a lot more sterile. We didn't get all the benefits we just discussed. So it's great that it's making a comeback now, and it's quite trendy, and all the hipsters are doing it. And it's super easy to make, and I started doing workshops on fermented foods almost 10 years ago now, because at that time it was either you make it yourself or you don't have them. The important thing is when you're buying them, if you're buying them, to make sure that they're raw, unpasteurized fermented veggies, because if you're going to a deli, for example, or a supermarket or even health food stores, and they have sauerkraut in jars that are on the shelf rather than in the fridge, that stuff's all been pasteurised, or it was made with vinegar in the first place, not properly fermented. And if it's pasteurised, that means it's gone through high heat treatment, and that means all the enzymes and the bacteria are dead, because both of them are heat sensitive. Yeah? That's why we have a fever when we get an infection, to kill off bacteria or viruses. So cabbage is a nice easy one to start off with. You can tell they're organic, they've got bugs on them. So you can use either a food processor, or with cabbage it's very easy just to slice. So we're going to just slice today. And personally I'm a fan of thinly sliced. However, you can slice as thick or thin as you please. You can, if you put cabbage through the food processor, it usually comes out in lots of little pieces, so it's a different texture again. And just to make it a bit easier, I'm going to give it a go up the middle. Okay, so cabbage, really easy to chop up so that it's in nice ribbons. There's a couple options that you have for fermenting for a starter culture. Okay, so a starter culture means the substance that you're using to get the beneficial bacteria to grow and to thrive. So the traditional way is just using salt, and there's a little formula to, well, not quite a formula, but there's a little ratio to write down. If you're using just salt, you want to use 2.5% salt. So that means you weigh your veggies, how much of the veggies that you are fermenting, and then 2.5% of that, that's how much salt you put in. Okay. Alternatively, you can use starter cultures like these. There's a few other brands as well, like Cultures for Life and Caldwell's. They're all good to use. So we're going to use some starter culture and a bit of salt today. You can use a combo. When you're new to it, I think it's quite a handy thing to have the cultures, because it is a bit of a guarantee that you're going to get the right guys growing. It is pretty hard to get it wrong when you use the right ratios, but just as extra backup.
Can you use too much salt?
You can use, yeah. The biggest problem that you'll have is it'll taste too salty. And you'll also, I can't recall the figures, but beyond a certain amount, you'll inhibit the growth of the good bacteria as well. But it's a bit art and a bit science. So if you are around that 2.5% mark, give or take a bit, you should be fine, yeah. So in the bowl, and we'll use a bit of carrot today as well. So you don't, so long as the veggies are reasonably clean, you don't actually need to peel them. In fact, the reason why you can make fermented veggies with just salt and not actually use a starter culture is because the bacteria are on the leaves and on the outsides of the veggies, because they're soil-based organisms, yeah? They come from the dirt, so that's why we want good quality dirt for good quality guts. That's where we get our bacteria from. Using the carrot in there gives it that little bit of extra sweetness. And it'll start fermenting that little bit quicker with the carrot in there as well. And then what we want to do is add our starter culture in, or salt if you're using salt. And if usually, I don't have a teaspoon anymore, I'll just guess. A couple of teaspoons of salt in there, and then you want to get your hands in there, okay? This is part of the joy of cooking. I should take my rings off. Is that you want to give it a really good massage. As my partner says, he likes to, at this point, turn the lights down low and get the nice music going. And give the veggies some love. So we're going to do this for up to 10 minutes. So would you like to come and massage the veggies? When you're fermenting, you want clean equipment and clean hands, but you don't need to worry about being too sterile, because you're going to add some good bugs to it. Okay, all right. So just get your body weight into it. It's much easier if you do that. You can twist and you can squeeze. Always
okay.
With a smile. Now, the next element of fermented veggies is the vessel that you're using. So there's a few different options that you have. You can use, basically you need a jar that is very much airtight, okay? So you can use Fido jars like this kind of clasp. This one isn't actually a Fido jar, but I prefer using the Fido jars because the wires are stronger, whereas some other brands, these wires can start getting a bit lax and so air can get in and out. So the Fido ones tend to stay nice and tight, yeah. The Fowler's Vacola jars are another option. They're spring-loaded as well, so they keep things nice and airtight. Or you can use fermenting crocks, of which there's actually a couple on the bench behind. But whichever system you use, the key point is that it's airtight, because what we're doing is we're fostering the growth of anaerobic bacteria, so bacteria that do not like oxygen. So if oxygen gets in there, we're more likely to get yeast and or mold growing or things like that. Okay, so airtight is important.
Is there a particular strand of probiotic that you'd recommend, like just for daily probiotics to have that you could sprinkle in?
Not a general one, unless you're using a food-based one. Like there are companies that make probiotic powders based on fermented foods, so you can use those. Otherwise, in terms of manufactured probiotics, I would recommend only using ones that you know that you need. So unless you have had an acute infection and or have required antibiotics, in those situations, then using a multi-strain probiotic can be a very good idea and help improve the recovery rate. However, for general use, if you don't know what your gut flora is like, I'm not actually a huge fan of just supplementing with any specific probiotics, because even the good guys you can get too much of, okay? You can get overgrowths of lactobacillus, for example, which is what is in 99% of probiotics, yeah? And if you supplement more of that, well then you can actually aggravate your gut symptoms or immune symptoms or inflammatory symptoms rather than helping. So I'm a huge fan of stool testing through places like BioScreen that give a rundown of what is and isn't growing that should and shouldn't be. And then from that you can determine what would be the most appropriate probiotics. And I find that makes a huge difference because, as I said, otherwise you can think you're doing the right thing, but you can actually exacerbate a process. So if you want to use one for general kind of use, then at least one made from fermented foods or the fermented olive leaf extracts and that kind of stuff that have a reasonably broad range of bacteria in there. But yeah, otherwise supplementation-wise, save it until you know what you need.
I think
that's looking good. So I'm going to give it a finish off at the end. So you can see almost, okay, we'll give it a little bit more. What we want to do is get it to the point where you can start to see the juice dripping out of it. The more juice, the better, basically. And that's why you want to really kind of, not get too rough with it, but definitely bruise it. It is a good little workout, hey? And this is really good to get the kids into as well, because they tend to love getting their hands dirty, right? So as long as their hands aren't too foul before you start the process, get their hands into this, and then they'll also be much more inclined to want to eat it when it's ready too, because kids love getting involved in the kitchen. We often kind of keep them out because we think, oh, it's just going to take up more time and it's a hassle. But it usually makes things a lot easier because they're part of the process. You get to spend some quality time with the kids and they want to eat it when it's ready. Okay. I'm going to do it a bit more. It'll make the next bit easier. Making a right mess on the table here. So we want to pack it into the jar and we want to push it down so that we're getting those air bubbles out and you can see the juice coming up. So this is a very plain batch, yep, just with the veggies, but if you want, you can add whatever herbs and spices you like. It's nice putting a bit of ginger in there or a tiny bit of garlic. You don't need much garlic, it gets more potent as you ferment it. I like doing combos like, if you're putting beetroot in there, again, cumin and ginger is a good mix. I like a combo of celery seeds and oregano and basil with cabbage, carrot and cauliflower. That's yummy. You can do turmeric and ginger ones. You can do mustard seeds, kind of whatever flavours you like and wherever your imagination will take you. Some of them you'll love and others you'll be like, oh, I won't be doing that again. It's funny, I've had a batch recently where I thought, I'm not doing that again, and it was just sitting in the back of the fridge for months and months, and then I was out of veggies and they were the only ones I had, and I was like, oh, I'll just have some, and then they were really beautiful. So they just needed that time to mature. And now I'm like, oh, I need to remember what I did so I can do that again.
So it lasts for like months?
Yeah, well that's what's brilliant about it as well, is the lactic acid in here that the bacteria produce is what actually preserves the veggies, which is why this was used in all traditional cultures to preserve their foods. So you can ferment this anywhere from, I would say, a minimum of 4 days, but up, weeks or months even at room temperature. And then once it's in the fridge, usually lasts up to a year. So that's why this effort, and I suggest doing a big batch, but that's why this effort really pays off, because once it's done, it's the ultimate fast food. It takes a good half hour or so to prepare it. But then you've got it for months and you can just dig into it. So we want to get that's about as high as I want to fill the jar, because it will swell up a bit as gas is produced. So you've got the juice covering the veggies, that's very important. And then we're just getting the bits and pieces off the edge. So by keeping stuff off the sides, it just helps to prevent any spoilage as well. And then you pop your lid on, which will differ depending on what kind of jar you're using. And that is it, that's all it takes, okay? So then that you leave at room temperature for, as I said, a minimum of 4 days. For your first batches, I recommend you do a week to 2 weeks. The longer you leave it, the slightly higher chance that it might spoil. But once you get proficient at it and you've got your process down pat, you'll find you'll be able to do 2, 3, 4 week ferments without a problem, okay? Unless histamine stuff is an issue, then again, shorter ones are going to be better, okay? So that's fermented veggies.